So Exodus chapter 17 is a story of the water from the rock. If I was to try to rate the familiarity of different Old Testament stories, I guess I would put this toward the middle to bottom. It's a slightly well-known story, but not super well-known. But it is a text we're going to look at tonight. And what I would like us to do is to start at the end and to try to get some context, some understanding for what exactly is going on here. So Exodus 17 and verse 7, this verse that we ended with, that we just read, I'll read it again. And he called the name of the place where all of this stuff happened, he called it Massah and Meribah. Why? Because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, is the Lord among us or not? So when we read verse 7, we're given a key interpretive principle to interpret the rest of what has gone on in chapter 17 in this story so far. And the problem that we see in Exodus 17 is not caught up in the desperate situation. The problem that we see in Exodus 17 is not in the desperate situation that the Israelites find themselves in. The problem in Exodus 17 is how they react to that desperate situation. Particularly, and he gives us two Hebrew words that he gives as names to this place, Massah and Meribah. What do those words mean? Massah, you probably, hopefully, have a little footnote that goes to the bottom of the text in your scriptures that give you a little help with the translation. Massah means testing. It means testing. And so what he's saying is he called it Massah because he called it testing because that's where they tested the Lord. But we have a question now, which is, well, how is what they did testing the Lord? How does that work out? What he tells us is they tested the Lord particularly by saying, is the Lord among us or not? So that's the test. They're testing the Lord. They're putting God to the test, which, if you've read any of the Bible, is not a good thing. They're putting the Lord to the test by asking this question, is the Lord among us or not? That's the test. Now, why is that a test? So, and I realize we're jumping straight into Exodus 17 here, and we don't have any of the context. So let me try and sum this up a little bit. If you were to pick up the Bible and to start to read it, beginning in Genesis, you would start turning pages and you would see that in the beginning God created things, and then you'd see the story of Adam and Eve, which we've looked at, and then you would proceed and you'd see the story of Noah, which we've looked at, and as you followed, you'd start to see that God is starting to do something special with a particular family. Namely, he takes Abraham and calls him out of the people group that he was in at the time and sets him apart and says, Abraham, I'm going to have a special relationship with you and your descendants. And he starts to make Abraham some particular promises. If you heard Pastor Gary's sermon, ridiculous promises. Because when we talk about God making promises to Abraham and his descendants, what we know from the text is that not only are Abraham and Sarah too old to start having descendants, but they are biologically unable to have descendants. But God makes promises to Abraham and his descendants. Particularly three things. And just as a device for you to remember, land, nation, blessing. Land, nation, blessing. What is the promise of God to Abraham caught up in? Land, nation, blessing. Land, God promises that he is going to take Abraham out of his present land, which was Ur of the Chaldees, and he was going to take Abraham out of that land, and he was going to take Abraham to a new land, a land of blessing, a good land, a special land where God was going to be with his people there in that land. He promised him a land. Secondly, he promised him a nation. He promised Abraham that he was going to take one man, Abraham, and through his descendants and his descendants and his descendants, that he was going to turn Abraham into this great nation. Now again, this is ridiculous because Abraham is too old to have kids and he and his wife can't have kids. But what you start to see happen is that God fulfills that promise by the time you get to the end of Genesis. So he promises him a land, he promises him a nation, he promises him a blessing. He says, Abraham, through you and through your descendants, particularly through one special descendant, we come to find out, that all the families of the whole earth are going to be blessed. So he promises land, nation, blessing, land, nation, blessing. So as you've been turning the pages through Exodus, you keep turning through Abraham, and you come to find out that Abraham does have a son named Isaac. and that Isaac does have a son named Jacob, and God changes Jacob's name to Israel. These are all stories that we've been looking at throughout this series. He changes Jacob's name to Israel, and Israel has not one son, but 12 sons. And by the time you get to the end of Genesis, what you find is that those 12 sons now have families of their own, some of whom are starting to have children of their own. And this promise that God gave to Abraham, I'm going to turn you into this nation, is starting to get fulfilled. You see it unfolding before your eyes. But you get to the end of Genesis, and while the promise about becoming a nation is being fulfilled, there's this lingering question in the reader's minds, which is, well, what about this land that you promised? Because with the end of Genesis, and you turn the page into the Exodus, what you find is that the people of God are not in the promised land. They are not in the land of Canaan. They are not in the land of blessing. They are not in God's special place, but they are in fact in the land of Egypt. And Egypt is not the land of blessing, to say the least. Egypt is the land of slavery. So you have this God who has promised himself to Abraham, saying, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to be your God. You are going to be my people. But they get to the end of Genesis, and as a reader, you're left wondering, well, what good is that if they're slaves to the Egyptians? But by the time you keep turning pages, now you're in Exodus chapter 3. And God appears to Moses at the burning bush, right? And Pastor Mike preached on this. And so God appears to Moses, and he starts making promises again. And particularly promises about this land. He says, I'm going to take my people out of this land, out of this dark land, out of this evil land, out of the land of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I'm going to take them, and I'm going to rescue them, and we're going to go to a land of blessing, a land where I am, a land flowing with milk and honey, right? So God is going to bring them to this new land. And the thing that you have to catch as you're reading that, and it becomes this theological presence in all of Exodus. Read Exodus sometime and look for this. All caught up in God's promise to remove his people from Egypt and to bring them into this special land is his promise to be with them. That's his promise to them. I'm going to be with you. You're going to be my people. I'm going to be your God. I will go with you. That's what he tells Moses. When Moses is arguing back and forth with God and he's saying, how am I going to know all this stuff is going to happen? God says the ultimate sign of all of this going to happen is that I'm going to be with you. Through this journey, I will be with you. So much so that at the end of it, I'm going to bring all the people to this mountain, and you're all going to worship God together because I'm going to be with you. And the necessity of God being with the people, again, read Exodus sometime and look for this. I mean, without the presence of God, the people are toast. Without the presence of God, they're dead. It's God's presence with them in the cloud, the pillar of cloud and the pillar of fire that enables them to leave Egypt. Otherwise, they were going to get caught by Pharaoh's warriors who went after them. It's the presence of God that Moses begs for in Exodus 33 and 34 when the people have rejected God by worshiping an idol, and God's saying, I can't go with these people. I'm too holy. They're too sinful. I'm going to wipe them out. And that's a crisis. It's a crisis for Moses because he knows that if God is not with his people, that they're going to perish. But what you do find is God promises, and he says, I am going to go with you. I will be with you. You're my people. I'm your God. I will be with you. Now let's connect the dots a little bit. Now we're in Exodus 17, and the people have a trial in front of them, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But why is this called the waters of Massah? Why is it called the waters of testing? How did they put the Lord God to the test? Because the question they're asking is not how are we going to get through this, but is the Lord with us or not? That's the problem. That's the problem. So it's the testing of God because they're questioning his faithfulness to his promise to be with them. It's also the waters of Meribah. And so hopefully you have a little note again that says Meribah means quarreling. So he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah because of the quarreling of the people of Israel. And so this word Massah, this title or Meribah that he gives to this place, it's a compound word that you see the root of in chapter 17 and verse 2. Therefore the people quarreled with Moses and said, give us water to drink. And Moses said to them, why do you quarrel with me? That's the same word. And so when you see the word Meribah, the little letters in the middle of that, reeb, that's the verb to quarrel. But, and forgive me for getting a little nerdy with grammar and language here for a second, but quarreling is probably not the best translation of this word, because this reeb, it's a specific word. It has a specific use. It has a specific purpose, which is a legal indictment on somebody for breaking the covenant. A legal indictment for breaking the covenant. So when you end up in the prophets like Hosea and Jeremiah and Amos, they're bringing a prophetic reeve. That's what this is called. They're bringing an indictment against the people because the people have broken relationship with God. It's a very technical, legal word. And when it shows up here in Exodus 17, it's not a mistake. It's not a mistake because what is happening, in fact, is not just that they're quarreling in the sense that you and I might get in a quarrel about some topic, or I might do wrong to you and you might get mad at me and we might have a quarrel. That's not the picture here. The picture here is that the people are bringing a legal indictment against Moses, saying, you're not holding up your end of the bargain. We find you guilty. And what Moses is saying is like, you're not bringing this indictment against me. You're bringing this indictment against God. And so he names the place Meribah because they brought an indictment against God. So again, what is the problem in our text in Exodus 17? The problem is that it's Massah and then it's Meribah. The problem is that they're testing God, and the problem is that they're bringing an indictment against God. Now, what this ends up shaking out to be is just a hard heart, isn't it? But the irony about it is that, we'll look at the Israelites and we'll say, they should have seen all the things that God was doing. They should have seen all the things that God was doing. If you turn back a page, what's happening is God is making bread fall out of the sky. If you turn back a page from that, what's happening is God is taking poisoned water and he's making it sweet for them to drink. If you turn back 2 pages behind that, what's happening is that they are crossing the Red Sea on dry land. If you turn behind that, what's happening is pillars of cloud and fire coming out of the sky, leading them through the wilderness. It's not like God hasn't been showing himself to them. But the irony of it is what they have just come out of is God bringing judgment on Pharaoh after plague, after plague, after plague, after plague of Pharaoh's hard heart. So what you have is imagine with me for a moment a few Israelites sitting around the fire eating manna and saying, man, can you believe that Pharaoh? Man, Pharaoh is such a jerk. I mean, flies and boils and frogs and the death of the firstborn. I mean, how could he not get it? This food stinks, man. We detest this food. Why doesn't God give us something we like? We want meat. Do you see the irony there? Do you see the irony there? And so what you have in chapter 17, by the time you get into it, is the irony of the people of Israel's hard hearts after not only seeing God's miraculous provision for them so far in the wilderness, but also put up against Pharaoh's hard heart that they had watched God judge. They had watched God judge Pharaoh's hard heart. And the question that we might have as readers as we read through this is, man, you guys just watched God judge Pharaoh's hard heart. What do you think is God's proper response to your hard heart? Because God brought severe justice down on Pharaoh for not listening to him. What do you think the right thing for God to do would be in their case for not listening to him? It would be to bring justice. And the thing that we're going to see in the text as we walk through it is that that is exactly what God does. He brings justice for the people's hard hearts. But the beauty of it is that he accomplishes that justice in a different way than you might expect. In a different way than you might expect. Okay, that was all introduction. Exodus chapter 17. Here's the problem. All of the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stage. And that's unfortunate. Sin is just, it's a transliteration. It's not a translation. This doesn't mean the wilderness of iniquity. It's just the name of the place. And so the wilderness of Sin by stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim, but there was no water for the people to drink. They're going through the desert, and they're camped, but there's no water for the people to drink. Now, that's the context. That's the context. Now, after everything I've said so far, and after our experience of reading the Old Testament and the New Testament, we might have a propensity to look at this and to say, yeah, that was a problem, but you just need to trust God. You just need to let go and let God. You just need to remember that God's going to work all things together for your good because you're called and loved by him. Now, those things are true, but step back into the context with me for a second. They're in the desert, and there's no water. They're in the desert, and there's no water. This is a real problem. It's a real problem. I'm told you can go days and days without food. I've never tried it, but I'm told it's possible. But you're not going to survive too long without water, much less survive in the desert without water. And remember, there's no 7-Eleven. They can't go down and buy a 12-pack of bottles of water. They're in the desert. It's a real problem. And God is bringing them through a real trial. Now, what we're going to see as this unfolds is that the trial itself is not the issue here. It's how they react to it. But I want to stop and remind us that God brings people, God brings his people through real trials sometimes. And maybe you're here tonight, maybe you're not in the desert with no water, but maybe as a metaphor, you really relate to that. And the thing about it is, in the world that we live in that has been stained by sin, that has been hijacked by sin, we're going to face real desperate situations. If you live long enough, you will face real desperate situations. You may be here tonight tasting desperation. Inevitably, the diagnosis is going to come back bad for somebody. Inevitably, the career is going to come to an end. Inevitably, relationships are going to get ruptured. Inevitably, children are going to go astray. Inevitably, spouses are going to abandon. There is brokenness in the world, and we're lying to ourselves if we deny it. But the God that we serve is not concerned so much with the trials that we go through as the opportunity that those trials give us to trust him. And if you're in the desert without water tonight, so to speak, I have to tell you, you have a choice to make. You can either shake your fist at God, like we're going to see in the text, or you can throw yourself on his mercy and his grace. And that is the place to be. That is the place to be. And he makes it possible. Well, we're going to see how he makes it possible. There's no water for the people to drink. Verse 2. So here's where we see this indictment. Here's where we see this indictment get rendered. Therefore the people quarreled. They brought their indictment against Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said to them, "Why are you quarreling with me? Why are you bringing this indictment against me? Why are you testing the Lord?" But the people thirst there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us up out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with this people? It's interesting, he says, what shall I do with this people? Not your people, not my people, not the people, but this people. There's an aspect of separation that's going on there. Like when I come home and my little son has been screaming all day and my wife says, you got to do something about your child. I don't know. He says, this people. There's a separation there. They're almost ready to stone me. Now, again, we have to put ourselves back into the context. Stoning. Stoning here is not a random act of mob violence. Stoning, we have to remember, stoning is a specific method of capital punishment. Stoning is a specific method of capital punishment. If you break certain laws under the theocratic reign of God, if you break certain laws under God's rule, then the result is capital punishment, particularly by the act of stoning. It's not that the people just kind of work themselves up into a rage and start flipping over cars and setting trash cans on fire and start throwing rocks. That's not what a stoning is in this context. A stoning is a specific legal method of capital punishment. So what Moses is saying, again, and I'm bringing this up because it's important at the end, all of this is a very specific legal lawsuit action against Moses. They're saying that they're bringing a legal indictment against him, and they're saying we're going to carry out capital punishment. And that's what Moses says to God. They're going to stone me. They're going to carry out capital punishment against me. They want justice to be served. And God wants justice to be served too. And here's how he accomplishes it. Verse 5 through 7. The Lord said to Moses, pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile, and go. So in verse 6, what is he telling Moses to do? He says, pass on before the people. Not get there first, but pass on before them in the sense of make sure everyone sees it. Pass on before the people. They're all going to have a view of what's happening. And take the elders with you, the ruling party of the people. There's not a court, there's not Congress, there's the elders of Israel. Pass on before the people. Take the elders of Israel with you. And take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile. And go. Now, the staff of Moses, the rod of Moses, is an interesting study. If you ever want to try and get into it and follow and trace what's going on with this rod and whose rod is it and what is it doing. But amongst all the other things that you find the rod of Moses, the rod of Moses is what Moses throws down in front of the burning bush, and it becomes a serpent. So later he takes it in front of Pharaoh and throws down the rod, and it becomes a serpent. And the magicians of Pharaoh, they try it too, but God's snake eats their snakes, and it becomes the rod again. That's the rod. The rod of Moses is when they go into battle, and they take Moses, and when he holds up the rod, they're winning. And when his arms kind of come down, they're losing, so much so that they commission people to come on his side and to hold up the rod. I mean, this is the staff. But of all the things that could be associated with this action that's about to happen, God says, take the staff with which you struck the Nile. And that's not a coincidence, and that's not an incidental detail. When God commanded Moses to go and take the staff and to strike the Nile, to smite the Nile River in Egypt, do you remember what happened? He goes out and he smacks the water, and the water becomes blood. And of course, the picture that God is trying to convey to the Egyptians at this point is that I am going to bring judgment. I'm going to bring punishment. I'm going to bring death. It's a judgment not just of Egypt, but of Egypt's gods. I mean, there's a lot of interesting pictures that are caught up when Moses strikes the Nile and it becomes blood. But suffice it to say for now, this is what God says to Moses. He says, take the rod of judgment. Take the rod with which you smote the Nile River and it became blood. So, again, what's going on? Justice has to be served. Somebody has broken the relationship. Judgment needs to happen. So God tells Moses, pass on before the people in full view of them. Take the elders, the ruling party out there, take the staff with which you struck the Nile, but this time you're not going to strike the Nile River, you're going to strike this rock. So go out there and strike the rock. So Moses goes out and strikes the rock, and water comes out of it. Miracle happens. Now, if you're looking at the text, you should say, whoa, but you missed something. Well, yeah, I skipped something very important. Read it one more time. Pass on before the people, taking some of the elders. Take in your hand the staff with which you struck the Nile. And behold, now this is just absolutely mind-bending. I will stand before you there on the rock, and you will strike the rock. Make no mistake. Make no mistake about this. We are the ones who stand before God in judgment. We stand before God, and God judges us. But did you see the flip-flop that happened there? God says, go take the staff, and I will stand before you on the rock. I will stand before you on the rock. So God the king, God the judge, comes down from his seat, as it were, and leaves the place of the judge and takes the place of the condemned. And he says, Moses, I'm going to stand there on the rock, and I want you to smite the rock. Moses, I'm going to stand there on the rock. I'm going to stand before you and the elders and the people. I'm going to stand before you, and I want you to strike the rock with the rod of judgment. And when Moses does that, life-giving water flows out of the rock for the people. Do you know what this is supposed to remind us of? Do you know what this is a shadow of? What's going on here is a picture, a shadow cast back into the Old Testament of when God would take the place of the condemned. Even though he is the judge, even though he is the one who is righteous, even though he is the one who has been sinned against, he is going to take the place of the sinners. And he's not only going to stand in their place, but he's going to stand there and take the judgment that is due to them, because God is clearly not the one who has broken his promises here. God is clearly the one who has not broken the promises. He has brought them out of Egypt. He has rescued them, and he has provided his presence in a pillar of cloud and fire. He has provided bread out of the sky. He has provided meat out of the sky. He has provided clean water. He has provided living water. And the thing about it is, the people are the ones who are continually breaking this relationship with God, and yet when it comes time for justice to be served, God is the one who stands in the place of the condemned and takes the strike of judgment, takes the rod of men, and is smitten so that the people who are the ones who have sinned, the people who are the ones who deserve judgment, can live. Wounded for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment of our peace is on him. By his wounds, we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We've turned every one of us, each to his own way. But the Lord has laid the iniquity of us all on him. That's what's going on here in Exodus chapter 17. The righteous judge leaves his seat and takes the place of the condemned. This is a shadow, a foretelling of what Jesus would do on the cross. So that Jesus cries out on the last day of the Feast of Tabernacles, if anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Whoever believes in me, as the scriptures have said, out of his heart will flow rivers of living water. See, Jesus is the one who has stood in the place of the condemned and taken the stroke of judgment so that we could have life. So that we could have life. And that's what's going on here in Exodus 17. So, if you're here tonight, you're a sinner. If I'm here tonight, and I am here tonight, I'm a sinner. And you and I do not become sinners when we sin. we commit acts of sin against a holy God because of who we are, because we are sinners. And the bad news of sin is that because we have rejected God, because we have failed to listen to him, because we have depreciated his blessings, because we have preferred our sinful way of life to his righteous way of life, what we deserve is justice. What we deserve is wrath. What we deserve is judgment. What we deserve is, quite honestly, hell. What we deserve is death. That's the bad news of sin. But the good news of the gospel is that God does not leave us in that state because of his great love for us, because of his mercy and his loving kindness. He steps down into our place. Because of his grace, because of his love for you and for you and for me, he takes the penalty that you and I deserve on himself in the person of his son, Jesus. And all of this to prove the fact that in verse 7 of chapter 17 of Exodus, when the people quarreled with God and tested him, saying, is the Lord with us or not? Is the Lord among us or not? To prove to us, I am with you. I am for you. God loves you. And that is wonderful news. That is wonderful news. And God loves you because he is loving. Not because of anything you could or couldn't do to earn it. It's because of who he is. See, God loves you, and he wants relationship with you, and he promises to be with you. This is the promise of Jesus in the end of the Gospel of Matthew, isn't it? I am with you always, even to the end of the age. I am your God. You are my people. And that is the good news of the gospel, is that every one of us has the opportunity to be with him, to be his people, that God is with us. And that is how we survive no water in the desert. That is what we need at the end of the day. Now, I'm not saying, don't mishear me, we have real trials, we have real circumstances that need real resolution. But at the end of the day, my deepest need, your deepest need, is for the living water that only Jesus Christ provides. And so, if you or someone in your family has a bad diagnosis, what you need is to come to Jesus. If you're struggling to find work, you need work. But what you need even more than that is to find Jesus. If you have a broken relationship in your life, you need reconciliation with that relationship. But what you need even more than that is reconciliation with God through Jesus. That is the living water that we need, or we will die. Now, I'm going to ask the worship team to come back up, and they had some more wonderful songs planned out that they practiced really hard for us, but I'm going to beg them to let me trump that and to allow us to respond to this word by singing the song we started with, which is Our God. Now, I got to admit, the first time I heard this song, I really did not like it. And music is that way. Sometimes you like certain songs, sometimes you don't like other songs, and there's all kinds of reasons that happens. Maybe you didn't have a good meal that day and you're just in a bad mood. Maybe it's the tempo, maybe it's the rhythm, maybe it's the instruments. You know, there's all kinds of things that contribute to why we do like or do not like certain songs. For whatever reason, I didn't like this song the first time I heard it. But the more I listened to it and the more I listened to the message of it, which is essentially what this text is putting this question in front of us, is God with us or not? And what this song affirms over and over and over and over again is God is with us. God is for us. Our God is with us. And that is wonderful, wonderful news. And if God is with us, what could stand against?